I think we'll get started. Hello, good morning. If you're joining us live on our webinar, Finding Your Direction, Leading Your People to Innovate, and also greetings to those of you who are watching the recording. This webinar is being recorded and you'll be able to find it on our YouTube channel, but you'll also be able to find it on our latest podcast series, which you can find on all good podcasting platforms. More news about that at the end. Can you imagine a time when you and your team are innovating in the most strong possible way, not just because they're coming up with great ideas, but because you have an effective innovation ecosystem containing the four principal elements, which you may have heard us talk about before, which lead you to come up with wonderful, creative ideas. Now, that first element, which we're talking about today, is that of direction. We're going to give you plenty of information about that as we go along. But that's not the only thing you're going to get out of this webinar. This is a chance for you to reflect. We can't tell you what your direction is in innovation, but this is a starting point of building the perfect culture of innovation in your business and your role in driving that as a leader. Now, this webinar will take maybe around 45 minutes. So we hope that you're able to bear with us and reflect as we go along. And I'm joined by Joe Nagle. But first, my name is Zach Curtis. I'm the capability. My name is Zach Curtis. I'm the capability director with a company called the Innovation Beehive. We exist to drive a number of things in culture, leadership, and innovation. And principally, it's all about creativity. How can we actually make sure that we have the best possible output to our ideas? And we work across a whole wide range of organizations around the world. So we're well versed in what it takes to be innovative, both for you and your team. So we hope to impart some of that information now. Yes, and I'm joined by Joe Nagle, who's our innovation director. Hello, Joe. Do you want to just introduce yourself quickly?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Zach. Thanks for that intro. Whenever Zach talks, I always feel I need to fill in some gaps. So that podcast that Zach referred to is called the People Innovation Podcast. And if you search for that, wherever you get your podcasts, you'll find it. We're into season 3. And that is where you'll find the audio from this webinar, the audio from the last webinar we ran in this series. But you'll also find in season 2, me interviewing a whole range of people from a variety of different industries and sectors about their view of leadership and innovation. And season 1 deep dives into the content that we're talking about today, the innovation ecosystem. I'm the innovation director at the Innovation Beehive and also the presenter of the People Innovation Podcast. So if you like the sound of my voice, definitely worth listening to the podcast. I'm delighted to be joining Zach for the workshop today, for the webinar today. And I will hand straight back over to you, Zach, because you're leading us through the next section.
Well, that's kind. Thank you, Joe. So there's a number of different things we need to consider when we're thinking about leading for great innovation. And that is, for example, what innovation means to the business as a whole, what it means for you as a leader, and what it means for your team as well. And we need to somehow marry those up together so that they're aligned in a particular direction. But we also want to know where we want to get to. We want to know how we're going to foster creativity, how we will engender behaviors for innovation in our teams, and what we're going to innovate on. Or, for example, how we're going to train people to innovate and how I, as a leader, will role model all of the things above. Now, today specifically is, again, all about that direction. There's a number of different reasons for that. Firstly, in all our experience with some of the world's most innovative organizations, we've uncovered and buy into a couple of different things. Now you see on the right-hand side of the visual there, the tangible zone and the battleground. Now there's so much discussion around innovation. It's become one of the world's #1 management competencies. And you'll see it in most job adverts, you'll see it all over LinkedIn and so on. And when people talk about innovation, they often talk about that tangible zone. Now, what they mean by that is having the physical environment, the creative environment full of bright colors and inflatable animals and so on. And that is stereotypically often the thing which people think of when they think of innovative companies. And that's great. That's perhaps a part of innovation, but it's right there at the bottom of that table. You also need, in that tangible zone, a clear structure and processes to make sure that people have the drive forwards to be able to innovate. The roadway is clear for them. You have those structures to help you be creative. But that means then that you need people to be trained. You need them to be capable. You can see the third one up there, capability. If they're capable of becoming innovative, then presumably lots of people will think that you are an innovative organization. But sadly not. What we've learned is the difference, which makes the difference, is that battleground. It's about making sure that we as leaders drive the right behaviors in our teams so that we have the right mindset to be innovative. It's not just about leading the horse to water. We need to encourage them to be able to do it mentally as well, regardless of how creative your teams think they are. So it's our role as leaders to do that. But again, to make sure we have that, we need to have the right direction. I'll explain why in just a little minute. Jake, we just go on to the next thing quickly here. Because when we talk about innovation, we talk about a number of different areas, but principally, people think about product. They think about product first because it's the sexy thing which people see in the news, the new Tesla or the new iPhone or whatever it might be. But it's not all about product. Particularly as a leader, innovation can come from anywhere, any type of problem solving or challenge solving area. It could be customer or staff experience or a business process. Any change or augmentation to that, regardless of how small, could be seen in some way as innovation. And we're going to look at a tool later on to help us expand our horizons in your thinking on where innovation sits in your company. The silence there, Joe, is my signal.
That's great. No, thank you very much. And actually, these three areas, these business processes, product, and experience, they're really about already beginning to expand the horizons of what innovation could look like. So, you know, when I first entered the world of innovation, I came from a completely different background. I came from a fundraising background, a major gift fundraising background. So I came into innovation as a project manager and worked my way through the experience ranks, as it were, because we don't have a formal hierarchy at the Innovation Beehive. We have, but we build on our experience as we go. And I've learned so much about innovation over the years. And one of the biggest learnings that I took was that innovation isn't just about new products. And particularly, it's about the way that you do things in an organization, and it's about the experience that you create for your end user or for your customer. So I just want to ask, feel free to type into the chat your perspectives on this. We're thinking about these three areas, these three top line umbrella areas, if you like. Where do you see in your organization some opportunities for innovation that might actually go beyond product innovation, that might be about the way you do things or the way you engage with your customers or your end users, or indeed the way you engage with your employees if you work in a people function? So just type into the chat and share your thoughts on that. And whilst people are typing, Zach, thinking about the various projects that you've worked on over the years, what would you say is the most, I mean, I guess, surprising innovation direction that's come out that you've been asked to work on? When you think about when we start from product, where would you say are some of the areas that you've been quite surprised that actually we're applying creative thinking to this and winning?
The biggest one that comes to mind is it's a manufacturing organization who wanted to, they're obviously kind of bound by process in some ways, and they wanted to totally change their culture. And that was surprising because for a big organization, it's a challenging thing to do, but they were willing to try and change their culture to make it more creative and innovative. But the big thing, which was a surprise, was having to then redesign some of their internal processes whilst keeping health and safety in mind and all that sort of thing. So that was a fascinating thing. So it ended up being a business process challenge.
Interesting. Yeah. And I've got one that's come through here, which is around customer service. So this organization, haven't said who they are, but that's fine. So they'd invested a lot in kind of infrastructure in their organization and in their, it's a hospitality company, right? And so they'd invested a lot of money in the infrastructure in their restaurants, in the technology in their restaurants. And they realized that their experience that went alongside it hadn't been invested in. So they actually realized they needed to innovate on the experience for the customer, for the end user. That's a really interesting one because, again, it looks like in that organization, they started with the product in mind. They started with the technology, with or even some elements of business process, the way that things are done, but they hadn't thought about the end user experience. And then they did. and they innovated on that. That's a really interesting one.
There's one here I love, Joe, which is about innovating, bringing people back together post-pandemic. I think a lot of companies are going through a similar thing. How can you make the employee experience somehow more engaging when you have distributed teams working remotely and in a workplace of some sort?
And another comment has come in here. We're looking at solving the same problems but differently. And we're a smaller organization, so we're looking to do it more agilely than the bigger ones. And that's really interesting in the context of innovation, because when we run through a tool that I'm going to share with you later, one of the challenges that large organizations have is their existing infrastructure constrains their ability to innovate. So agile thinking is great, but if you've got a solid infrastructure that is, literally billions of capital invested in your infrastructure, how can you innovate and work agilely in that context? But you just need to think about setting a clear direction. So that's what we're going to talk about now, about the innovation ecosystem and how you start with the direction so that you can optimize your organization to deliver on the promise of innovation that is inherent in your people. So the innovation ecosystem is a model that was developed by the founder of the Innovation Beehive, Mark O'Keefe. It's enshrined in a book, which you can find on Amazon. Just Google the innovation ecosystem, look for the innovation ecosystem on Amazon. You'll find the book. It's a great book. There's stories, there's theory, there's background, there's tools and activities you can do to think about this yourself in your own context. So it's really worth taking a look. There's also a white paper on our website, which is a sort of light version of the book, if you like. But fundamentally, the innovation ecosystem is comprised of 4 key elements and then 1 key output. So we're going to be focusing on the direction today, so I won't dwell on that, but I'll just give you a whistle-stop tour of the other 3. The environment is around the culture that you embed in the organization and the leadership behaviors, the leadership mindset that is created through the way that leaders lead, the way that managers manage, the way that people interact. And all of that can be optimized by focusing on the innovation ecosystem. In our next webinar, we're going to explore that in depth. So that's very much the battleground that Zach was talking about, the mindset and the behaviors, but it only works if you have a clear direction. The engine is where a lot of organizations start. This is the structures and processes that you put in place. So a lot of organizations we work with come to us and say, we need some innovation support. We've got this ideas scheme, but no one seems to engage with it anymore. And my first question is, well, what happens when people engage with it? And often the answer is nothing, because it looks like you've got this shiny thing that you've done, but actually you need background processes, you need a culture, you need a direction, and you need to give people the tools, which are the enablers, in order to use that structure and process. So the enablers are the tools, the skills, the capability to actually think creatively. You wouldn't expect someone to drive a car without giving them lessons first. And yet we somehow expect people in our organization to just be able to be creative. That's a myth. The myth of the sort of born genius is not true. Genius is born from hard work, from being shown how to do things, and then thinking how you can do them better. But ultimately, when you have this innovation ecosystem in place, it will generate innovation after innovation after innovation. There's one crucial step. That yellow arrow there is possibly the most important part of the innovation ecosystem, because it creates a feedback loop. Every time you generate an idea that comes out of your innovation ecosystem, every time you generate an innovation, you need to look back at the beginning, work your way through to check that actually this innovation is working and delivering on your vision, delivering on your strategy, and delivering on the purpose of the organization. And if it's not, you need to optimize your innovation ecosystem and realign. And I'm going to share a tool with you shortly to help you do that. But today we're talking about how you can lead an innovation ecosystem and how you can lead for the direction. So if you've been on webinars with us before, you'll have seen this slide. This is what people are looking for from leaders in an uncertain world. So we're living in uncertainty thanks to COVID, but actually we need to go beyond COVID when we think about innovation. We need to think about changes to social and economic landscape in the world, thinking about Brexit in the UK context. We need to be thinking about changes that are going to come from climate change. We need to think about changes that are going to come from technological disruption. And that's both in the context of how we work, but also in terms of how consumers consume what it is that we're trying to sell to them. And until we get our head around the sheer diversity of uncertainty that is facing us, we're probably going to be missing things. But what our people need from us, how our people need to be led, is they need to know they can trust us. They need to make what we call a trust leap. So they need to be able to step into the unknown with us as their leaders. And that's so important for innovation. In order to do that, people need to feel that their leaders are credible. So we need to be consistent in our behaviors, consistent in our approach, consistent in our communication, so that we build credibility with our people. We need to be compassionate. Innovation is dangerous ground. Innovation is fraught with failure. So we need to be compassionate with our people. We need to give them a psychologically safe environment, which we'll get onto in the next webinar, for them to feel safe and secure in the innovation environment that we're creating. Now, innovation is all about changing things, right? By definition, innovation is about doing something new to create economic or social value. But in order to do that well, people need to have stability. And that's where the direction comes in, right? We know we're working towards this goal. That's our direction. And yes, as I'm going to show later, the goal may need to change. The direction may need to change. But because we give you a framework and we give our people a framework for understanding how that direction will change, we're actually creating a stable environment for them to innovate. And innovation actually is a really optimistic game. You're going to encounter failure consistently. So actually what you need to be is hopeful, and you need to share that hope with your people. And the way that you will do that, we believe, and from our experience of working with innovation teams, with leaders in various fields across various organizations, what you need is to be a 4.0 leader, an exceptional leader for disruptive times. And there are 5 elements to that. There's leading in head, which is all about strategy and tactics and managing your P&L, the boring stuff, the stuff that you would get taught on a leadership development program back in the 1980s. I think I wasn't born then, sorry, Zach. Leading in heart is all about empathy. It's about engaging with your people, seeking to understand their perspective. But actually, in the context of innovation, it's all about engaging with your customers as well. It's about understanding your customers' world, your customers' needs, and getting under the skin so that you can build deep and meaningful insight. That's both to build the direction for your innovation ecosystem, but it is also about getting insight for every idea that you generate, to make sure that your ideas are coming from not you, but from the need that you've identified in your customers. Leading in health in the context of innovation is very much about the failure piece. It's about building psychological safety for your people so that they know that they can fail in a safe way and be supported in doing that, and be supported to learn from the failures, from the wins, and from the and from the times when things don't quite go to plan. So psychological safety is the hallmark of an innovation ecosystem and the environment that you build in that. Leading in habit is about being consistent in those first 3, really. It's about consistently communicating the key message of the innovation direction. It's about being consistent in your mindset, consistent in your behaviors, and consistent in the visible manifestation of these with your people. You know, people remember how you make them feel, not what you do. It can take one bad day in a leader to really damage the trust that they built up in their team. So we do need to be consistent as leaders, and it's our responsibility to do that. Leading in history is so important for innovation. This is about setting a legacy. It's about understanding why we exist, what we're seeking to do in the world. So the direction really comes to the foreground when it comes to leading in history, comes to the foreground when it comes to setting an innovation direction. So Zach, I think that gives people an overview of the model, the innovation ecosystem model. It also gives us an understanding of how we need to be thinking about leading in the context of the direction, but also in the wider ecosystem. So should we dive into the direction, and you're going to share some examples?
And that was a beautiful thing, Joe. And this is a chance for everybody to reflect a little on what they can do and how they bring direction to your innovation strategy. Because direction, it gives us purpose, it gives us a destination. You know, imagine hundreds of years ago, you have to, I don't know, sail to America. You know, you have to build a boat. You know, you need trained sailors and provisions to get there, but with no clear understanding of whether you're going to go east or west, and with no easy compass, you're unlikely to get there efficiently. I love a particular Disney movie, of course, which is based on a wonderful book by Lewis Carroll, isn't it? Of course it is. I can't believe I even questioned myself on that. But when my daughter was young, I used to watch Alice in Wonderland on the Disney movie, but the book is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And particularly when Alice goes into, I think it's Told You Would, and she encounters the Cheshire Cat, and she has a conversation with the cat, which goes like this. Alice says, would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? That depends a good deal on where you want to get to, said the cat. Oh, I don't much care where, said Alice. Then it doesn't matter which way you go, said the cat. So long as I get somewhere, Alice added as an explanation. Oh, you're sure to do that, said the cat, if only you walk long enough. Now, that's chapter 6 of Pig and Pepper from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And of course, what that really demonstrates is that without a clear idea of where you want to get to, you can get somewhere as long as you don't care where that somewhere is. Now, that really brings out the essence of what the direction is all about. And there are some questions you might want to ask yourself. Because firstly, as a company, you're going to have an inspiring, well, I presume you're going to have an inspiring vision, and that's an essential part of business success. You also need in some way a vision for your innovation strategy as well. That vision of the company should then be translated into a business strategy, and it should be the same for your innovation strategy as well, because your innovation strategy has to be aligned in some way to the business strategy and the delivery thereof. And you should be able to articulate it clearly for your people and for your teams, so that if the innovation strategy was that ship sailing to America, we will be able to engage everybody in that direction, in that strategy, so that we can support each other to get there. So perhaps if you have a pen and a piece of paper, make a couple of quick notes or thoughts around, do you know what your innovation strategy is? Now, I have to say, if you don't panic. A huge number of companies don't have an innovation strategy, or they have no clear understanding of what their innovation efforts are leading towards. So do you understand those areas of focus that innovation is driving you towards? And do you know how it contributes to the delivery of the overarching business plan and strategy? Now, if you don't, then you may need to either, it depends if you're responsible for it or not, but in some ways as a leader, we are responsible for disseminating that information to our teams. So try and find out what that strategy might be, or help other people to create it within your organization.
Can I just chip something in here, Zach?
Yeah.
I've been working on a project recently applying creative thinking to the development of an organizational culture framework, and had a very interesting debate over the last few days about the difference between a vision and a mission. And what we've landed on in terms of what we mean by these phrases is a vision would be the world that we want to see, right? And a mission is what we'll do to get there. And I think that's quite a succinct and simple way of thinking about the difference between them. And therefore, when you think about your innovation strategy, you'll want to be thinking about the world you want to see, because that will give you some insight into the kind of areas of focus that you'll want to focus your innovation efforts on. But you also want to think about the mission, because when you think about the mission, you'll be thinking about what it is that your organization is going to be doing. So actually, the vision and the mission combined will give you the fruitful ground for thinking about these questions and building your innovation strategy if it isn't already articulated by the organization. And as Zach rightly said, actually our role as leaders of a team is as much to do this thinking for our team as it is to take the thinking from the organization and apply it. So if you don't have a clearly articulated innovation strategy, there is absolutely nothing to stop you from developing an innovation strategy for your specific team, so long as it's aligned to the business strategy. And if your organization doesn't have a business strategy, I think you need to talk to us because we can help.
Shameless plug there, Joe, but quite right. I'm thinking about a couple of examples, and I'm going to give some, let's say, big examples. And the reason for that is that it's going to inspire you that even companies who are in some ways considered the most successful innovation companies have a degree of uncertainty in some way, which we can take inspiration from. And there are some key principles to draw out as well. That first one is Facebook. Now, in Facebook's 10-year innovation roadmap, there are a couple of really interesting points to note. Firstly, let's look at the structure of it. Now, if you look along that bottom line, you'll see that they've got it planned across 3 principal buckets along the bottom: ecosystems, products, and technologies. Now, if you can't quite read it on the screen, it doesn't matter, because I'll draw out the principles for you. Now, in their first 3 years, the plan was just to embed and iron out the Facebook platform itself, what works, what doesn't work, and continue involving it. In the next 2 years, I think it was year 3 to 5, was to expand the platform with complementary products. Now that's video, messenger, purchase of Instagram, and so on. Now, the interesting part is in years 5 to 10, that was all about exploring connectivity, AI and virtual reality and augmented reality. Now, what's interesting about that is that there are categories for innovation which they planned for, but they know that the world changes so quickly and so rapidly that they didn't know what AI would look like 5 to 10 years from when they set this up. So they're just writing keywords to help them have that innovation strategy. No detail, just a clear direction in a couple of words. Now, the principle, of course, is we don't necessarily need to be very deeply detailed in the long-term vision of what we're trying to achieve in innovation with that direction. We just need that general direction as a minimum. Now, by doing that, you'll remain agile, you'll be able to change direction quickly without having to unpick complex details. So that's really interesting, as long as you have a fairly clear idea. Now, innovation, as Joe said, isn't something which just happens. It takes careful planning, messaging, training, and of course, it's very often where topics meet and clash. You may hear that innovation happens at the intersection of different ideas. Now, Adobe's chief strategist, Mark Randall, knew that all too well when he created Adobe's table of strategic elements. Now, you may have seen this before, but he identified 14 elements ranging from, I don't know, big data to gamification to advertising, based around the company's strategy and business deliverables at that time. So he pulled out key elements of the business strategy, and then the idea is by combining elements and clashing them together, you can identify some interesting niches in the market while still being aligned to the general direction of the business. He then allowed Adobe employees to come together and clash those elements to see what they can come up with. Now, that made innovation entertaining for them. It made the output dynamic and stretched in the ideas they were coming up with, because you were coming up with two separate ideas and intersections, yet still moving in the right direction. So the principle there really is, by giving really clear topic boundaries, but the freedom to create, especially at the converge of topics, means that you can come up with some great engaging ideas within a direction. So having that clear direction, but perhaps some movement within it, is very, very, very useful.
One of the things that I absolutely love about that example is there's a deep understanding of your people enshrined in that as well. You know, the kinds of people who are going to be working for Adobe are, you know, scientifically minded, they're techie people. So the idea of a table of elements, and I can effectively create my own compounds. You know, I can take this element and bash them together, create a molecule, and from that I'm going to create something new. I think it's one of the most ingenious and people-orientated pieces of communication I've ever seen when it comes to an innovation direction. I think it's honestly, I think it's one of the best. I absolutely love it, and I wish I'd thought of it.
Well, it's been borrowed, Joe, by quite a few other companies now, and I think if it gets to the right end, feel free to steal with glee.
Absolutely, steal with glee. Brilliant, thank you, Zach. So there were a couple of examples of the sorts of direction that we're talking about, and I think that Zach drew out some key principles there. One is, you may not know what it's going to look like, and actually, if it's true innovation, you shouldn't know what it's going to look like. So feel free to put some question marks in your innovation direction, because actually that's the fruitful ground for innovation. And I think the other key principle is the idea of combining different elements together to find a brand new direction, which is still aligned to your business strategy. So, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can do that when I share the tool in a moment. But the first thing I want us to think about is going back to the Leadership 4.0 framework. There are some key questions that you can ask when you adopt the practices of an exceptional leader for uncertain times, which can then apply and help you to define your innovation direction and help you to lead as an innovative leader, to lead the direction. So first off, as we've talked about, you need to understand what is your business strategy. And that comes into leading in head. If you can understand the business strategy, you're well on the way to understanding your innovation direction. But actually within that as well, it's worth asking what's happening in my organization. So it's worth putting your head above your team and looking around and saying, what else is going on around there? You know, what other strategies are happening? What are the tactical initiatives that are coming up in the near future. That's useful because by thinking like that, you're starting to connect dots across the organization. You're starting to see how your strategic direction, your innovation direction could feed into other teams in the organization. Really important question to ask. Gives you insight into your innovation direction. And then when you really get into insight, it's in leading in heart. So what do our customers need and what is happening in their world? Crucial questions to ask when it comes to your innovation direction. You don't just look at your business strategy and look at the opportunity areas that are identified, or look at the strategic pillars of your strategy. You think, what's going on in my customer's world, and what will these strategic pillars or these strategic objectives mean for my customer? What problems can these strategic pillars solve for my customer? What are their needs? What's happening in their world today? These are the kinds of questions that you need to be asking when it comes to defining your innovation direction. Now, I'm a big believer in not trying to shoehorn models together. So you'll notice that there's a gap here for leading in health, and that's absolutely fine, right? You know, the thing about Leadership 4.0 as a model for leadership is you are going to use all 5 elements of Leadership 4.0 in your daily work, but sometimes more are going to be dialed up than others. I'm sure if you really put your mind to it, you can find some way of putting a question here which would lead in health. I chose not to. I don't think it's necessary. When we get into leading in the environment, that is when we're going to focus on leading in health to create that psychological safety that people need. But leading in habit, this is where communication comes in. How can I communicate my direction to my team in a way that engages them? Think about Mark Randall creating a table of elements for his team to clash together. That's a brilliant example of effective, consistent communication that really drives creativity because it engages people and draws people in. So how can you communicate about your direction to your people and to your wider organization in a way that draws them in, connects them to the purpose that is inherent in the direction, and really drives their thinking and drives their creativity? And finally, leading in history. What is my personal purpose when it comes to innovation? Always start with yourself, because if you aren't connected to your innovation direction, how are you going to get excited about communicating it to your people? How are you going to get excited 6 months down the line when you're trying to implement an idea that's been generated around a direction that you're not passionate about? You have to find a connection to your personal purpose and your personal passion if innovation is going to thrive in your organization. And connected to that, you need to connect it to your team's purpose and your team's passion. If they aren't inspired and if they're not excited about the direction, how are they going to actually drive these things through to completion? And I'd say the biggest problem that organizations face when it comes to innovation is that they don't put the structures in place to actually see innovations through to completion. But the close follower to that is that people aren't excited about the innovation that's happening in the organization. Innovation has to be engaging if it's going to thrive in the organization, and it starts with a clear direction. So I'm going to share a couple of tools for you, tools for leading in innovation, for leading the direction. And the first one is about setting your direction. Now, this is a tool that we've used with a number of organizations to really expand their thinking. So, you know, we'll be invited in and they'll say, we want to come up with ideas around new products for our customers. And we'll say, great, okay, let's just take one step back and see where we get to. Because as Zach said earlier, there are 3 key areas of focus for innovation: process, product, and experience. So before we dive into creating a direction that is purely focused on product, or purely focused on experience, or purely focused on business process, let's take a broad view. And this tool is a brilliant way of doing that. You start with observations, and you try to make these observations without any sense of judgment, without saying, well, this is a positive or this is a negative. You just observe what you see. And then you look for the pain points within that. So then you start to make value judgments on what you've seen. You also start to look for what's working. So again, that's a value judgment on what you've observed. And then by looking at those pain points, by looking at those those things that are working really well, you can identify opportunities that exist within these 3 pillars of innovation. So let's look at an example. This is a hypothetical example. You know, we work across sectors, so I know a little bit about most sectors, and I chose to focus on manufacturing because I think it's one of the sectors that is least well known for innovation. In fact, they often call it just call it R&D, which is fine. You know, it's still innovation, but It's often called that. And often these organizations have quite heavy infrastructure. So a lot of capital is tied up in the existing way of doing things, which can make innovation hard. So I thought I would challenge us to really look at a potentially challenging example of an innovation ecosystem. So here we go. So observations you can make on business processes. These are just top line. You would put a lot more detail into this if you were to do this activity yourself, and I'll send you a PDF of this tool to use for yourself. So, but for example, there might be multi-site processes. In other words, we might build part of the final product here. We might build another part of it here, and then those two things would combine at a third site. And there is where we make our final product, or we might even be part of a supply chain where the final product is made further down the line. R&D might well be integrated into the business. The R&D function might be based in one of our factories rather than being separate. We have strong supply chain relationships because a number of our suppliers predominantly just supply us. So there are some observations which I have made without value judgments. That's quite important at this point. You make your observation without making value judgments on them. And then you look at all of your observations and you say, right, okay, so we're multi-site. Now that means that we have a complex and time-consuming process for creating our end product. We also have our R&D integrated into our existing infrastructure, which actually means there's potentially limited scope for innovation because R&D gets sucked into the day-to-day. They get sucked into problem solving, fixing things rather than exploring the new rather than innovating. So there are a couple of pain points that you can identify from those observations that we've made. But then when it comes to what's working, well, in a way, it's good that R&D is integrated into our business because R&D has strong connections with our supply chain. Because they're integrated, R&D are constantly talking to and working with our suppliers. So there's a potential positive there because in innovation, it's good to start making connections, connecting dots. And the fact that we have a strong supply chain means that we do have healthy relationships with our suppliers. So again, there's a bit of an opportunity that's already appearing here to do something with our supply chain. R&D are connected to them. We've got healthy relationships with them. So perhaps what we could do as part of our innovation opportunity that might inform our direction is build relationships with our supply chain to bring their external knowledge into our organization and then challenge our assumptions about what innovation would look like in our sector. So you see, we're starting to connect externally, which is a really positive win for innovation. So we'll do the same activity for product. Let's take a look at this. So the observations that you might make: solid product, it's consistent demand, but it is a commoditized product, right? So this is a manufacturing company that is making something that anyone else could make if they had the infrastructure to do it. That's what we mean by commoditized. But what we are seeing is the competitors are demonstrating alternative uses and ways of enhancing that commoditized product. So again, we're making those observations without a value judgment. And then we get into the pain points. We're consistently pushed on price because we're a commoditized product. That's the nature of the market. It's a law of the market, effectively, that if it's a commodity, the price will go down. What we're noticing is that we're always late to market with our innovations. We're always followers. We're never leaders. So there are our pain points based on our insights. What's working? Well, we kind of hold a big chunk of the existing market. But actually, when I was chatting to Zach about this just before the call, I kind of observed that you could even move that into a pain point because the dynamic of disruption is that it's the market leaders that are hit hardest by new innovations precisely because you're a market leader with a big chunk of the existing market. In a sense, we've got more to lose. So actually, in terms of our product, we're not seeing much working. So there's definitely going to be an opportunity here to do something with our product for sure. But actually, having done this analysis, what we've realized again is we've got solid demand. We've got consistent customers. We hold a big chunk of the existing market at the moment. So we now have an opportunity to work with our customers rather than going off and doing something over here and then saying to our customers, here's what we've done. Do you want it? We can say to them, right, work with us to develop potential solutions for the future. Let's share some risk and let's share some reward. You can come up with all sorts of really interesting commercial models for combined innovation projects with your customers, with your supply chain, and with you as the middle, kind of holding it all together. Real opportunity there to develop a product in a novel and interesting way that actually the competitors just aren't doing. So thinking about experience, the final pillar here. Okay, so we've got basically a commoditized product, which means that our relationships with our customers is transactional. There is nothing sexy about a load of rock that we're selling, or a load of glass that we're selling, or whatever it is that this manufacturing company makes. There's nothing sexy about it. It's a transactional piece. The client needs X number of tons or X number of square meters. That's what they buy. Transactional. Some of our clients have been with us for decades, so there's a loyalty piece there. And our the procurement procedures in our customer organizations are slowing down the process of selling to our customers. No value judgments. These are observations. These are facts that we've identified in our observations, in our exploration of the landscape. But then when we apply the pain points, we can say that actually being a transactional experience, this leads to a commoditized experience for our customers. So they see us, we see them as buying a commodity, they see us as selling a commodity. So we're actually reinforcing the transactional nature of our relationship with our customers. And it doesn't have to be that way. The processes which seem outside of our control are the things that are slowing us down. So it could be easy to just say, well, nothing we can do, wring our hands and say, it's just slow. But when we see what's working, we can see that there's customer loyalty. So there's opportunity for growth, because some of our clients have been with us for decades. And actually, if you have a loyal customer, there are opportunities to sell more to them. And the other thing about customer loyalty is that it gives us an opportunity for influence. So the opportunity that we can identify there is that we can work with our customers to transform the experience of procuring our product. This will save them and us time, and it'll get us to sales more quickly. So what we've identified there is 3 opportunities which sit under business process, product, and experience. But actually what these say about our opportunity areas is that they are all externally focused. So actually what this tells us about the direction we should be thinking about creating is that we need an external direction. We need to be thinking about how we engage with our customers and how we engage with our supply chain. So by doing that activity, what we've discovered is something new about the nature of our business and the nature of our innovation direction. The second tool I want to share with you is the Uder Loop. So once you've set your direction, once you've set that direction, you'd need to be thinking about how that direction can constantly be improved as you go through the innovation process within the innovation ecosystem. I talked about that arrow earlier, that arrow pointing back to the direction, creating a loop. And one way of thinking about how you use that loop effectively is the Uder Loop. So this comes from fighter pilots in the Second World War. They would constantly be looking around them for what may have changed in their environment, what may have changed in their landscape. They would be observing. And then when they saw a change, they would then orientate themselves to adjust for that change. They would make a decision to take an action and move and change their direction, change what they were doing in that moment. And by doing that, they're creating this Uder Loop, this virtuous loop where they're constantly exploring their environment, constantly looking around them. We need to do the same, because not only does that movement of the aircraft in the fighter pilot analogy, not only does that change their direction, but it also changes the environment that they're operating in. And it's the same with innovation. Every time an innovation comes out of our organization, one, we need to be asking, does this actually answer the challenges that are facing our customers? And if it doesn't, we need to look again at our direction. The second thing that we need to be asking is, has anything changed in our market as a result of us launching this innovation? And therefore, we need to look again at our direction and say, does anything need to change? And if we change our direction, we might need to tweak our environment, we might need to tweak our engine, we might need to tweak our enablers. So the Uder Loop is a fantastic tool with some key questions to ask to keep our direction on track as we work through our innovation ecosystem. So just going back to those questions to consider, thinking about the direction as a whole, there are these key questions to think about. And what I think I'll do is, for those of you who joined the webinar, I will send these questions out to you, because they are really the blueprint that you need to think about when it comes to developing your innovation direction. What is our business strategy? Fundamental, but also what is happening in our organization, and how does that connect to what our customers need and what's happening in their world? How can I then communicate the direction that I've created to my team? And what is my personal purpose when it comes to innovation? What's the purpose and the inspiration that will connect my team to the direction? And how can I draw that all together into a series of statements that represent opportunity areas for my organization to really take hold of innovation and start coming up with ideas that count? And once you have that, you can then start to think about how you build and how you create your innovation environment. And we're going to be running a webinar on that on the 17th of August. I think that won't be me, will it, Zach? That's you and Angela running that webinar.
That is Angela and I, yes.
So look out for that. I'll send a link to register for that to you when I send you the recording of this webinar. Anyone joining on podcast or on video, you'll find a link to register for that in the description. And that is our webinar. So I hope you've found that really helpful. Zach, thank you for the brilliant examples that you shared. I hope you found the tools helpful, everyone. And I wish you all a great day.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody.